We want to begin this half hour with a trial of a beloved kindergarten teacher in Georgia. She's accused of molesting 3 young girls in a case that has splintered a community. NBC's Michelle Kosinski is in Ringgold, Georgia, with the latest on this. Michelle, good morning to you.
Good morning, Matt. Hi there. You have hundreds of people here, even more online, rallying behind the now fired kindergarten teacher Tonya Kraft. But you also have this deep feeling for 3 little girls who at times graphically describe what they claim Kraft did to them. You have fragmented testimony and contradictory statements and memories of little children. Amid that, imagine facing the rest of your life behind bars.
2 years have passed since she was accused, and Tonya Kraft has lost her job, her home, custody of her young daughter. But to many, she is still the beloved kindergarten teacher they refuse to believe would harm a child.
They don't want the truth. They don't want any of that. They want a conviction, and they're going to get it one way or another.
There are websites and blogs furiously calling the trial a witch hunt, saying Kraft is the victim of scheming detractors or shoddy police work or overzealous prosecutors.
How can this happen? How can I go from being a mother and a teacher to having a mugshot on television for something I did not do? This kind of situation, it could happen to anyone. It could happen to anybody at any time, and all there has to be is an accusation, and that's it. You're stripped of your rights and your life and your children and your home.
It started with one little girl claiming Kraft fondled her at a sleepover with Kraft's daughter. The girl, now 9, in very detailed testimony, says the abuse happened multiple times when she was in kindergarten and 1st grade. Though her story has changed some, she said, "There's more, but I can't remember." And when asked why she didn't remember certain things earlier, she said, "I just remembered." But 2 other girls have made similar accusations. The father of one broke down.
I said, "Are you 100% sure that this happened?" And I'll never forget the look on her face or in her eyes. She stopped everything she did and looked me dead in the eye and said, "I know it did, Daddy."
Tonya Kraft has been indicted on 22 counts of molestation and sexual battery.
You raise your right hand and take an oath, ma'am.
One expert testified that the victim's medical exams showed signs consistent with sexual abuse, while another said there were none. There's even been a sort of character assassination of the main accuser, a child movie actress.
You're also dealing with a professional child actress that played the role of an abused child. It's very scary for me to wonder how I'm going to defend myself against that.
While hundreds have come out to support her, Kraft's one-time best friend testified against her, saying Kraft molested her daughter. The jury will soon have to choose between 3 little girls with some graphic descriptions and an adult who insists she did nothing wrong.
No matter what the result is, I'm innocent. And whatever a jury decides doesn't change that.
There is a question here of whether the children were led in their testimony by police or parents, but also a question if adults were scheming against Tonya Kraft, why would they manipulate little kids to do so? And would children that age really make up stories like this? It is a tough one that could determine whether this woman spends the rest of her life in prison or not. Matt. All
right, Michelle Kosinski in Georgia for us this morning on this story. Dan Abrams is NBC's chief legal analyst. Dan, good morning to you.
Good morning, Matt.
This is a tough one. You've got children who were 5, 6, 7 at the time the alleged crime occurred. Now they're 8 and 9 at the time of a trial. How do you judge their credibility as witnesses when someone's entire life hangs in the balance?
It's really hard for 2 reasons. First of all, because they were so young when it happened. And secondly, it's the time that's passed since then. So you're not just asking 5- and 6-year-olds to talk about what just happened to them. You're asking 8- and 9-year-olds to talk about what had happened to them years earlier. So both sides have to be very, very careful, because no one wants to be in the position of suggesting that the child is doing anything wrong. I think both the prosecution and the defense want to take the position that the children are laying out a story, an account, and even from the defense's perspective, they want to be able to say that if these children are not telling the truth, as we claim they're not, it's not because they did something wrong. It's because either they were manipulated by parents or they were manipulated by investigators, etc.
One of the other defense strategies appears to be, and you're right, it's a tough place for a defense attorney to be, to cross-examine a child. One of their strategies seems to be to question the investigation itself.
Yep, absolutely. And look, that's what happens in these types of cases. You very often see the defense, and in this case, it's exactly what they're doing. They're saying this never should have gotten here, that these children were led by the investigators. And what you see is the defense saying there were suggestive questions. These are kids. When they're asked a question that suggests that maybe it happened and they say yes, and then their story changes, etc., well, that's not reliable. And that's what you're seeing here from the defense, in addition to attacking some of the physical evidence. They're essentially saying what they say is physical evidence isn't physical evidence, and we also want to be able to show how normal everything actually was.
You know, there's so many times you hear attorneys debating the idea of a defendant taking the witness stand on his or her own behalf. In this particular case, is this one of those situations where Tonya Kraft may have to take the witness stand?
She may. I mean, unless things have gone so badly for the prosecution, she really may. This is one of those cases where jurors are almost going to demand in their heads to hear from the defendant herself. Yes, you can try and undermine the testimony of the children. Yes, you can try and undermine the testimony of the investigators. But in a case like this, which is so personal, I think that you need to have that defendant on the witness stand. Of course, the problem with that is she's going to be confronted with certain accounts. She's going to be confronted with certain evidence. And the question is going to be, how does she do when that happens?
Dan Abrams in Los Angeles this morning. Dan, thanks very much for your perspective on this.
All right, Matt.
But let us begin this half hour with the trial of a popular kindergarten teacher, Tonya Kraft, who was accused of molesting 3 young girls. The defense has now rested its case. NBC's Michelle Kaczynski is in Ringgold, Georgia, with the latest on this story. Michelle, good morning to you.
Good morning, Matt. You have this likable teacher and mom. Some here say about the last person you'd want to believe could be accused of 22 counts of molestation. And Tonya Kraft is basically on trial for her life. That courtroom packed shoulder to shoulder, waiting to hear whose word will prevail, hers or 3 little girls.
Tell me, if you were to wear a thong, does that mean you're a child molester?
No.
Now, what about flirting with men at a formal gala? Does that make you a child molester?
No, and I'm not a child molester.
Tonya Kraft took questions for 2 days on the stand, her defense making light of all the things people have tried to bring up against her, though prosecutors boiled it down.
If you molest a child, if you touch a child's genitalia inappropriately, you're a child molester.
If you
it's
do
that
that
simple.
And that is what she's accused of doing by very young girls who at times gave painfully detailed descriptions of how they claim Kraft fondled them at her home.
There are 3 children that believe things happened to them that did not happen.
A case racked with controversy, back and forth conflicting statements, conspiracy theories, allegations that the children were coached or questioned too much. Among those against Kraft, her angry ex, but also her one-time best friend.
I didn't molest any children. I can't tell you what a child molester would do.
The defense says when all this started, 2 of the little girls had been caught touching each other, and that when they were harshly disciplined by an adult, that's where the blame started to shift to Tonya Kraft.
I don't know how she got from one point to believing something that's true that's not,
that that's exactly what has happened.
Big questions, though. If anyone had it out for this teacher, why would they manipulate innocent children? Why would 5- and 6-year-olds make up stories like these or go along with them for 2 years now?
Nobody wanted to believe that this was true, but the more that came out and the more that the children explained, it just got to the point where you just couldn't deny it anymore. Something had to have happened to these children for this much to come out.
To those who've been calling this a witch hunt or conspiracy on the blogs and websites.
And your media campaign pre-trial has promoted the idea that this is a conspiracy of the children's families, district attorney's office, court system, and Catoosa County.
How it happened, I don't know, but it has happened. And unfortunately, these children are just as much of a victim as I am.
And right now, it's her word, basically, against theirs.
I don't know what you want. I want the truth.
Came out in court that Tonya Craft and her family have so far spent about $500,000 on her defense. Prosecutors actually criticized that, saying money can't buy the truth. But it should be over soon. We expect closing arguments to start today. Matt.
All right, Michelle, thank you very much. Wendy Murphy is a professor at New England Law Boston and a former prosecutor of sex crimes and child abuse. Wendy, good to see you. Good morning.
Good morning.
In all cases of any kind, a defense has to weigh an option of whether you put the defendant on the stand to testify in their own defense. We've just seen that Tonya took the stand for 2 days. Did she help or hurt her case?
Well, I think it's good when a defendant can take the stand, because even though jurors are told not to use it against them, they kind of wonder, what are you hiding? Why were you afraid to take the stand? On the other hand, then they watch her very carefully. And there were times when I thought she came across well. There were times when she was defensive and had a kind of protest too much attitude. So that's not good.
It seems to me her problem and the defense's problem in trying to explain this, if they're saying these 3 young girls made up this story or were coached to make up this story, they then have to answer the why.
Right.
And the why is, it seems very hard to explain in this.
Yeah, there isn't one. And, she was asked a question, why do you think that first child came forward? And her answer was, I don't know. When you ask a jury to believe that you're innocent, really, that's what she's saying. She's not saying, I hope you have some doubt. She's saying, I didn't do anything. When you can't say, and here's why I think they made it up against me, the jury goes into the jury room and says, we have no choice, really, because the only thing that makes sense is that these 3 kids are telling.
Well, but the jury is also instructed to look for reasonable doubt in a case like this. And is there reasonable doubt in this case?
There are some issues with some of the testimony, even if it were 1 child against her. But we're talking about 3 kids. 2 of them have genital injuries. There's no explanation for how they all just happened to, roughly speaking, describe the same kind of abuse.
You said something to me in the commercial break that with your experience that I took as very important. You said you've never seen a circumstance. Kids don't lie that well.
Yeah, I mean, they do lie about things like taking a cookie from the cookie jar, but they don't lie about this because
where they can fool prosecutors and law enforcement.
Lying convincingly so that trusted, experienced adults could be tricked into bringing false charges, it's literally impossible.
Here's one of the problems I had. The prosecution wanted to seem to dissect Tonya Craft's character. They talk about the clothing she wore, that she was a flirt with men, that she had a few drinks every once in a while, that she mowed the lawn in shorts and a tank top. That, in my opinion, hurt their case, because I looked at it as a complete distraction and has nothing to do with whether someone would molest a child. What do you think of that strategy?
Yeah, I think that sort of stuff can come across as unfair to a jury and work to the benefit of the defendant. The problem is she walks into that courtroom presumed to be a sweet kindergarten teacher, married, heterosexual, mom of little kids. So almost everything that comes out that suggests she isn't that person is probably a little bit good for the prosecution, because really what the defense has going for it that's really the best evidence is the fact that the jurors won't want to believe that a sweet-faced kindergarten teacher is capable of doing that to 3 little girls. It's sort of the, elephant in the room that the prosecutor really has to take on. And, I think it's important that the jury come to know that she's not that Mary Had a Little Lamb kind of schoolhouse teacher. It's important that they knew she had a homosexual event in her life so that they can say, oh, oh, well, maybe she is interested in little girls. So on the one hand, it may be a little bit...
So that's a tough leap from A to B, isn't it, though?
But it's the picture. You want to be able to make sure the jury has a picture of her for who she really is. There's no way they're going to find her guilty because she wore a thong, or for that matter, had an affair with a woman. But they're going to think more clearly about the evidence if they have a sense that she has these colorful features in her life.
Wendy Murphy. Wendy, thanks very much for your perspective. I appreciate it.
In this half hour with a verdict in the controversial trial of a popular kindergarten teacher accused of molesting young girls. On Tuesday, a jury found Tonya Kraft not guilty on all charges. She is here to speak out in an exclusive live interview in just a moment. But first, NBC's Michelle Kaczynski has the details. Michelle, good morning to you.
Good morning, Meredith. The tension that packed that courtroom every day finally ended in just raw emotion. This case split this town between those who believe Tonya Kraft molested children and those who said she was the victim here. She faced the rest of her life in prison, lost her job, her children, and this morning, for the first time in 2 years, woke up free from those accusations.
Okay, go ahead and bring the jury in.
Word of a verdict after a month of painful testimony sent people literally running to court. Tonya Kraft barely able to breathe. Her whole life riding on this moment.
Count number 1, not guilty.
It kept going.
Count number 21, not guilty. Count number 22, not guilty. This 11th day of May 2010. Signed, Dick Pritz.
It was over. Tonya Kraft broke down.
Hey, wait. That concludes y'all's service. Okay, let me give you a couple instructions, okay?
For her supporters, elation.
22, not guilty.
Not guilty on anything. We knew it. She's gonna get to see our daughter.
And for Kraft, once it had sunk in,
You want to hope the truth comes out, but you're scared to death that it won't.
a vindication even she was not sure she would ever see.
I can't get the 2 birthdays I lost to my daughters. I can't ever get those back. And the time away from my son, and I can't get those back.
2 years ago, this started. 2 little girls were caught touching each other. Parents were upset. The girls punished. And allegations emerged that Tonya had molested them at her house. 3 girls told a similar story, at times in great detail. For friends of the accusers,
there are a lot of supporters who have already been very vicious for my believing these girls, but little girls do not make up things like this. There's no sensible reason for them to have made this up.
To Kraft, there are no winners here.
I don't want anything to be about me. I want it to be about false allegations and what it does to the children.
The battle lines drawn right through this Civil War town will need time to heal.
I think it's from a lot of anger and from a lot of resentment. But Tonya would never do this.
These people tried to destroy this woman's life. Thank God justice has been done.
Those close to the accusers said the little girls told such similar stories over time that it got to the point that adults said they could no longer deny that something had happened to them. But the defense cited very similar cases to this one, in which they said the children were questioned so many times and in such a way that eventually they started telling adults what they thought they wanted to hear. Meredith?
Michelle Kaczynski, thank you very much. Tonya Kraft is with us exclusively along with her husband David and her attorney Demosthenes Lorandas. Good morning to all of you.
Good morning.
Tonya, 5:20 yesterday afternoon, the jury foreman says not guilty 22 times, once for each of the 22 counts against you. As you were listening to the foreman, what was going through your mind? What were you feeling?
I was feeling, in one sense, relief, but I wanted to wait until I heard it 22 times before I could even remotely let it sink in. As I said earlier, it wasn't a victory. There's nobody that wins in this situation, and my whole heart had been taken, and I got half of it back. But until I get my children, I won't have my entire heart, per se, back.
And you lost custody of your children 2 years ago. Were you at any point worried that you would be found guilty?
I was worried the entire time. I'm just kind of one that researches. I went and I researched similar cases. I researched a case in Bakersfield, California, and there was actually a documentary on people that have been falsely accused. I knew the amount of people that are convicted and that are later exonerated on false allegations. I actually went and spoke to some children that are now in their 30s that were part of false allegations, and I almost couldn't let myself think there was going to be a not guilty because I didn't know how. I never thought I could have been arrested for something I didn't do. So it's like I absolutely had to expect the worst and pray and pray and hope for the best and the truth to come out.
You know, this happened in a small town. Everybody knows everybody else. Rumors grow like stuff in a petri dish, essentially. They spread that quickly. Some have characterized what happened to you as a witch hunt. Do you believe that you were the victim of a witch hunt?
I believe I was possibly the victim of a perfect storm, per se,
what do you mean?
As the children were as well. I think that there are many attributes to this, one being there already were some people that, friendships that were no longer friendships, and whenever there was, a certain situation between normal childhood behavior and pointing and touching, and then my name immediately got put into the mix, and then it turned into a parental phone calls back and forth, and even my name being brought up, didn't Miss Tonya do this? And a lot of that was brought out in court, even by the children's own admission in their tape of what their parents told them had happened or not happened.
But why do you think ultimately you were accused of these charges of molesting little girls?
That actually is a very good question, and that's why whenever I began my search for the truth, I began to find the experts that could answer that question, because that's what kept me awake at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking, how can this happen? How can you go from doing absolutely nothing to it being twisted into something so heinous? I know with my own daughter, the only thing she had ever said was that I had put medicine on her.
And I think, just to clarify for our audience watching now, I think most people do not realize that of those 3 little girls, one of them was your daughter. Your daughter testified for the prosecution against you, and I think that led a lot of people to believe, well, if her own daughter says she's involved in this kind of behavior, she must be.
Right. And you get a lot of that, and I understand that thought process, especially before. And even though I probably will never teach in a classroom again, I really hope to educate on how you can truly go from a child, nothing happening, to not only them talking about it, but truly believing that something happened to them that did not happen, through a process of, I hate to use this word, but through a process of inept therapy, through a process of investigations done wrong, through a process of interviewing with leading and suggestive questions, and parents.
But from a mom's point of view, an emotional point of view, to witness your daughter on that stand, now you haven't seen her in 712 days, except for the time you've seen her in the courthouse. What was that like for you?
That was the absolute hardest thing that I've ever experienced, because my job as a mother is to protect her, and there obviously was no anger towards her. It absolutely broke my heart to see that my daughter had been pretty much indoctrinated to believe things that weren't true, and to sit there, was obviously emotional, and I sobbed and was actually berated by the prosecution for not being able to, as they said, act like a grown-up.
Dr. Lorenas, why do you think your client was acquitted in the end? What was the turning point, if there was one, in this trial?
When Tonya did her research into this, she determined that she had no chance at all unless she gave the jury the tools, the tools from science, the tools from all the research, to make a good decision. And the turning point was that we determined, and these of course are the hardest cases of any case to win. As a doctor, I know these are the most tragic cases, and as a lawyer, I certainly know these are the hardest cases to win. I'd much rather take a white-collar crime case. Tonya determined that she needed to give the jury the tools, and when we treated the jury like people that could really understand this stuff, they rose to the occasion, listened carefully, and took those tools back to the jury room and made a decision on behalf of those little girls. and on behalf of Tonya and her family. And it's a good turning point for that community.
And whose idea was it to put Tonya on the witness stand in the first place? Because that's a very dangerous thing to do.
Tonya and I determined from the time we met each other that no matter what the Constitution says about not having to take the stand, when the charges are this horrible, they must hear from you. And so Tonya sucked it up, got up there, and told the entire truth that she was allowed to tell. Many things she wasn't allowed to tell, but she told everything she could and stood up to a tremendously vicious attack on her. I'm really proud of her.
You know, David, you have stood by Tonya through all of this. She lost her job as a teacher, says she may never teach again, probably won't. Lost her home, lost custody of her children.
I'm really relieved that this part of it is completed by at least a verdict. There's a lot of things to do yet, and I've seen virtually every emotion in Tonya possible, but I'm very proud of her. She never quit fighting. She researched, she studied, she went, talked to people, she did whatever she could to stand by her innocence and prove her innocence, and I'm extremely proud of her and very relieved today.
And unfortunately, we don't have enough time to delve any deeper into this, except to say that you have received death threats since this verdict from people who think that this was not fair.
That's why we rushed her out of the courtroom.
And I know that today you're going to file to regain custody of your son and your daughter, and you have one final message for folks out there. I want to share that.
I want to make people aware that this can happen anywhere, anytime, to anyone, and just to get it right, to get professionals to get it right, to have qualified individuals interviewing the children, and for parents, if there is a situation that you wonder about, then take them to the proper people. The rumor formation, just get it right for the children, because the children that are part of false accusations are just as devastated as children that truly are molested.
There are a lot of victims in this. Tonya Kraft, thank you so much. David Kraft as well. And Dr. Lorandos, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much.
The case that split apart a small southern town. Kindergarten teacher Tonya Kraft lost her job and custody of her kids 2 years ago when she was charged with sexually abusing children. She was acquitted in May, and now she's worked out a custody deal with her ex-husband. We'll talk to them in a moment, but first, here's NBC's Michelle Kosinski.
The defense calls Tonya Kraft.
Just over 6 months ago, Tonya Kraft faced that packed Georgia courtroom, silent as a tomb and split right down the middle, to defend herself.
I did not and have not sexually abused any child.
The rest of her life in the balance, her words against those of little children.
I'm here because I have been falsely accused.
There were hundreds who supported the popular, exuberant kindergarten teacher, and others who believed she had molested 3 little girls, including her own daughter, who was taken away from Tonya for 2 years during all this. One child's father cried in court.
I said, are you 100% sure that this happened? And I'll never forget the look on her face or in her eyes. She stopped everything she did and looked me dead in the eye and said, I know it did, Daddy.
But there was also inconsistent testimony, accusations that some had access to grind, and that the children were coached by adults. Tonya's daughter never said she was touched inappropriately. It was such a confusing, indefinite mess. But for Tonya, reality, that question hanging heavy in the air. Was she the innocent victim or a predator who should spend the rest of her life behind bars? The jury delivered vindication.
Count number 1, not guilty. Count number 22, not guilty.
22, not guilty! Not guilty on anything! We knew it!
That is what Tonya hoped for on that day in May.
I was not going to let a system railroad me and hurt these children. So absolutely, this could happen, as I had said, to anybody, anywhere, at any time, like that, and your entire life is gone.
And today has gained back what she most treasured. She will now share custody of her son and daughter.
We knew that the outcome, that we could do this. We could work this out and we could do this.
In a case everyone said could have gone either way, Tonya Kraft survived. For today, Michelle Kosinski, NBC News, New York.
Tonya Kraft and her ex-husband, Joel Henke, are with us exclusively. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
I'm interested at the end there, you said we knew we could do this in terms of working out the custody agreement. I think a lot of outsiders would say, how can they do this? I mean, a lot of water had passed under the bridge. There had been a lot of tension between you two, including the fact, Joel, you were one of the people who testified against Tonya in court. How did you work this out?
We worked it out because, like we talked about on there, it was for the children. We actually were in a room by ourselves. There were no attorneys when we were discussing this. There was nobody else in the room but us. And we shed some tears. We talked about some things. And we said a lot of things that just needed to be out in the open.
Is this let bygones be bygones, Joel? In order to enter into this agreement, which shares custody of these two children, 11 and 8, I would have to ask you, do you now believe that nothing that she was accused of was true?
Well, Matt, basically, you know, I thought about that a lot, and Tonya and I had a lot of great conversation about it and discussion, and as she said, she had a lot of tears. Had a history teacher in the 7th grade tell me once, he said, you know, if we don't learn from history, we're condemned to repeat it. And that kept kind of just resonated inside of me, and we had to determine that from this point forward, we're going to move forward for the best interest of our children.
And talk about the relationship with your children now, Tonya. Aiden is 8, Cole's 11. Aiden was called to testify by the prosecution as well. So what is your, and you didn't see her for 700 days, what is your relationship with your daughter like now, and your son?
Actually, with both the children, and especially my daughter, because that is what a lot of the focus is on due to the allegations, it has been described by myself and by others that have observed as if nothing has happened. It's a normal, it's happy, it's
great
healthy.
Deal of therapy to get to that point?
I mean, to be quite honest, what I will say is I think the best thing is that they are not. They're learning to be healthy children now without being in a therapist's office every week.
Yeah, what impact has it had on the kids? Because they lived with you for two and a half years.
Right. And we have wonderful children, so that's a base that a lot of people unfortunately may not be able to claim. But again, I think it was our determination to make sure that they were healthy.
You guys are fine now. I mean, I want people to know that in the commercial break you're laughing and joking, and it seems as if this has completely been put behind you.
It really has, and I'm going to explain it, I guess, in one way that I believe. I do have a very strong faith, and it was very unusual that day. It was almost like in that room, it was almost like there was a physical heart transplant without having one. I do feel like there was an amount of forgiveness and there was an amount of healing that cannot be explained.
You had filed a lawsuit, Tonya, for compensatory damages worth $25 million against various parties, including the lead detective in the case, the sheriff, and by the way, a civil suit against Joel. What's the status of that lawsuit?
The status, actually, this week, because there are different motions and things that need to be filed, we will be filing something this week. As far as Joel and Sarah are concerned, they will be dismissed.
Joel's current wife.
Yes, Joel's current wife. And
dismissing the civil suit against Joel?
It is being dismissed, and it's actually being dismissed, and my attorneys are going to get me if I get this wrong, I believe with prejudice, which means that it cannot be refiled. So that indicates a very strong trust level to where not only is it being dismissed, but it will not be able to be refiled.
This is news to you, right?
Well, it is, because when we sat down in our meeting, if you want to call it that, we sit down in a room together, and one of the first things that we put out on the table was that, let's not focus on all the stuff that's going on around us. Let's focus on what we're here to do, which is care for our children. And that's just the way we did it. If everything else works out, it takes care of itself, and we'll just focus on what we're supposed to focus on.
For the sake of Aiden and Cole, I hope it works out, and I appreciate you guys sharing your story.
Thank you. And I really feel like that hopefully with other people that are going through divorces, that they can really see that no matter what you've been through, the children are absolutely the most important, and you can care about the other parent not as a marital figure, but as a person. And I feel like that's the best thing you can do for your children.
Tonya and Joel, thanks very much. Good luck.
Thank you so much.
Kindergarten teacher Tonya Kraft, recently acquitted of molesting young girls, has filed a lawsuit and is now fighting to get her reputation back. NBC's Carrie Sanders has more now.
Do you promise to tell the truth?
She was the accused.
Count number 1, not guilty.
Now Tonya Kraft is the accuser. The former Georgia kindergarten teacher has filed a $25 million civil rights lawsuit.
Not guilty. This 11th day of May.
Earlier this month, she was acquitted on all 22 counts of sexually molesting 3 young girls, but she lost her job, her home, and her family.
I can't get the 2 birthdays I lost to my daughters. I can't ever get those back. And the time away from my son, and I can't get those back.
Kraft is suing parents of the accusers, investigators, prosecutors, counselors, and welfare workers.
I can't say that if she got $25 million, it would make her feel that she's whole again. There isn't enough money to compensate Tonya.
In the 52-page federal lawsuit, Kraft alleges investigators coerced and suggestively questioned the 3 young girls and assumed that sexual abuse was in fact true. The lawsuit claims the defendants acted with malice. Kraft's reputation ruined when she was labeled a sexual pervert.
I believe that they went in believing that a crime was committed even before they had sufficient evidence to even consider a crime.
In a joint statement, Catoosa County, the Sheriff's Department, sheriff, and lead detective deny any allegations of wrongdoing. Individuals named in the suit did not respond to NBC News calls and emails. Kraft's trial in tiny Ringgold, Georgia lasted